hatches are a big part of CAD. If you're not familiar with what a hatch is, even on this plan, this gray is a full solid hatch. Most of the time you see hatches with stripes or a cross hatch, or there's all sorts of patterns. So let's make a simple one before we start talking about, and I'm actually going to make a layer. I like to have my hatches on a specific layer. You can always hit this X to end a new layer that you made. You cannot get rid of a layer if you have any elements on it. So let's call this one pattern. Oh, I like caps as well. L. Oops, why are my caps not on? There we go. L pattern. And I'm actually going to make this one 31. I just happen to know the code for it, for my pen style. And let's make that active. Okay, so to start a hatch, you're going to type H or hatch. We'll start it. Right. So first thing it's going to ask is either pick internal point. So that's kind of like what we did with the border. You can see my crosshair is in this square, and if I left click in there, it fills it with a almost solid looking hatch. Let's actually get rid of this one. So I'm going to do hatch again. Picking the point is fine. That works very similar to the way the boundary did. The reason I would suggest not doing pick internal point and rather switch to select objects with boundaries you've already created is that once you start introducing XREFs and a lot of complicated line work behind where you're trying to hatch, a lot of times it'll either freeze your computer or it takes a really long time. I've just run into several situations where I've been working for a long time and I lost a lot of progress because I tried to hatch something that was too complicated and made my computer crash. So I would suggest trying to have a border already set up, because you can do select objects and then actually select your closed item, and that will also fill in your hatch from there. So for example, let's just delete this one. If I do hatch, it always saves the last setting, so I'm still back into select objects. So if I select this one, select that one, and select this one, and then hit enter, all of these three are filled. But as I hover over them, they act as if they're all the same hatch. So they're combined. You see a little dot in the middle. The reason for this is within the same hatch command, whatever you choose to hatch will become associated with one another. They're going to apply the same hatch you're using. They share all the same properties. We'll go over how to split these, but that is a method, or that's the way that AutoCAD sets up hatch is whatever things you hatch on the first go, that's what you've got. You can change that setting, but I find it very useful anyway because I tend to hatch all of the same elements together. That way, in the future, if I need to change what that hatch looks like for, let's say, a plant bed, also with this, so let's talk about some of these hatch properties. First, let's change our hatch. So automatically, once you select that hatch, your hatch editor should come up as a new menu tab, and this has sort of everything you'll want for the hatch. So we'll come to these in a little bit later, but initially over here you should have different patterns that you can select from. You know, there's bricks, there's a diamond crosshatch, different types of stone patterns, things like that. Ours, for whatever reason, actually I know the reason, but it's looking very solid. Now there is a solid option, but I can see that this ANSI 31 is the one we actually have selected, this diagonal hatch. Now the reason for that is because our scale of our hatch is at 1. It's very small. Now if I change this to let's say 60, I'd start to see the individual lines. Let's change this to 240. That seems about right. At 240, we're seeing all of these individual lines. Now as I go through here, you'll see these patterns start to change, and the scale on them aren't all similar. So depending on what pattern you're using, you're going to have to adjust your scale to be appropriate. I'll talk about this when we open up our templates, but you can't have templates at specific scales that you plan on printing at, that your hatch pattern's already set up to the appropriate scale. That's always handy, but a lot of times you can just kind of eyeball it and figure out what looks correct. So as you see, as I change the pattern, all I do is left click on the new pattern. All three of these change. Similarly, I could change the color on it, but like we discussed before, we're going to always keep everything on by layer. If you need to have hatches separated by layer, just make new layers. It's better to do that than to get into the unorganized business of changing individual objects to have different colors. Other settings over here that are important, you can change the transparency. Like I said, we're not going to mess with transparency because I think you can accomplish those things with line weights. Changing the angle, let's get to something that's straight. So changing the angle can give you a lot of options within the same hatch. And sometimes, for example, if you've got bricks, I actually need to bring this scale down. Let's bring it to like 6, no, let's bring it to 12. Still, oh, that's 120. 12. If this is a building you're working on, and let's say this is a project you're working on, this is the building face, you're gonna want this hatch to be associated with that angle. So you can move the angle to be matched up with the building. If you get really fancy, you can find out exactly what this angle is based off of a dimension. We'll cover that a little bit when we get to that section, but you can always rotate these hatches to look like they're associated with other elements. Similarly, if let's say we've got, okay, I'm going to exit out of that. I'm going to do H for hatch. I'm going to select this. Anytime you click, as you see, these are not associated. So these, because I did that hatch command separately, I can change this one and these aren't going to change. Now what I can do is match the properties of this one. So all I did for that was I selected this hatch. My hatch editor automatically popped up. I hit match properties and then click on the other hatch. And then it's giving me the same rotation, the same hatch type, the same scale. But now let's say that we need this to associate to the building over here. Well, we know that this is rectilinear, so I can actually just slide this back down to 0. But we want to have our first block kind of associated with this corner. So what you do on here while you have this hatch selected is you hit set origin, and then you click on this point. And what that does is it's set, because all this is just an infinite pattern that they've set up as essentially almost another CAD file, and you're telling it where its new origin is. So all that does is it slides that pattern to start at a specific point. And if you wanted a whole block here, you would just figure out what that distance is and set your origin to a different point. Other things within the hatch editor, as you can see, both this one and if I go over here, have this associative box highlighted. So what associative means is, and this is one of the nice things about hatch, is if you set that border up beforehand, it'll automatically associate your hatch to that border. So if I start moving this border around, the hatch fills in automatically, and I don't have to move this hatch. These are set up the same way right now because they are associative. If I move that border, my hatch will move with it, or continue to fill in whatever that border is. Sometimes you don't want hatches associated, and to do that, all you got to do is unclick associative, and now it has its own grip points. So it has grip corners. So if I move that, you see our shape, our border shape is in the back. But I can treat this almost like a polyline. I can add arcs, things like that.